CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson.
What's going on, CFL fans, and welcome to another edition of CFL 110 presented by Coolbet Canada right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Andrew Paterson will bring in the Hammer, Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press in just a minute to tee up 4 big games in the Canadian Football League in Week 7 and look back at what happened in a 3-game Week 6. Let's bring in the Hammer right now, Jeff Hamilton of the Freep. And Hammer, big weekend coming up in the Canadian Football League, as we're going to get to in a minute. 3 very interesting games on the weekend as the landscape of the CFL continues to shift as we get closer to Labor Day and the midpoint of the season.
Yeah, and this week, Huss, we were down a game in our regular slate, but it's still packed a punch, man. I thought this weekend's games, well, not necessarily super close, all of them, that is, jam-packed and created some more narratives. I still feel like, as you mentioned, as we hit the third way of the season, I feel like we still have so many more questions than answers at this stage.
Listen, I think last week asked many. They didn't answer. They maybe gave us more questions moving forward, which we'll get to. By the way, you mentioned that there were 3 games last week. There was almost only 2. What an ordeal for the Riders and Stamps on Friday night in Regina. And as we'll get to the Stampeders in a minute, we may as well start off right there because this is the team right now that is the talk of the Canadian Football League, and the fact that they had to go through a delay all Friday night in Regina at a place where there's a huge country concert, not a single hotel room available, and sleep 4 to a room in the dorms at the University of Regina, and then come out the next day and absolutely lay one on the undefeated Riders. I mean, what a statement the Calgary Stampeders have made now in back-to-back weeks before they come to Winnipeg at a sold-out Princess Auto Stadium on Friday for the rematch.
Buddy, imagine someone telling you had to stay in Regina for 16 hours more than you expected to be in? Approximately, yeah, about that. Probably about 16 hours more. And then, if that wasn't enough to make you angry and upset and completely thrown off emotionally, spiritually, and physically, were asked to stay in the dorm rooms of the University of Regina. I'm sorry, man. I originally thought, wow, this was going to be an advantage for the Riders playing against a team that is a majority of which probably didn't get a great night's sleep. But instead, it was the exact opposite. They channeled that anger, that frustration of being in the flattest of all lands and then having to sleep in essentially university student-like living conditions, and they just didn't lay off. It was relentless.
Yeah, listen, just before we dive into what happened in the game, I do want to give a big shout-out to Rider fans. Not only did they stay there, by the way, lean on your organization. I will give the Bombers credit, and I know there's a big rivalry, but the Bombers have had a couple extended delays, and precedent has been set. Beer prices are lowered during those delays. They get back to pregame beer pricing. This happened here on 2 occasions. So Regina fans who were drinking $9 beers that entire time deserve maybe a freebie or 2 from the Riders, but I digress.
I think they did get it. I think we need to say one more thing before we actually get into the game. I know there was a lot of confusion with the air quality policy rules around it. And a lot of people were pointing at the 3 hours, right? They looked at the time when the game started and then did the math, obviously, and we'll go, whoa, what's going on here? Why is the game starting after what they
The game never did start.
Well, that's the thing. They never did start. And that's the reason why they held off and off. And you got to remember, Huss, like a lot of industries, whether it be sporting organizations, leagues, or even just companies in general, a lot of policies are created because you hit a situation that is unprecedented or something you haven't dealt with, much like the air quality policy we see now was created within the last couple years as we started to see more wildfire issues here, and we're going to see it for the foreseeable future here, season after season. I would argue here now, Huss, they need to look at what occurred in this game and nail down a time. Like, it's great that those Rider fans, stuck it out and had a good time, I imagine, for the most part, for a game that never actually happened. But I do think that the league needs to be a little bit more understanding of not just people's time, but player safety. Like this idea that you could have started the game at like 11:15 at night, to me seems a little bizarre, even for a league that, I know they just can't set things up and do things, the next day or whatever. I do think there's an issue here that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think a big part of it also was fan safety, but player safety. I mean, the fans were still there. They weren't telling them to go home. And, it was the matter of, playing football at a very high level in those conditions. That was the reason for the delay in the first place. But just to finish up the shout out to Rider fans, there was a lot of them that had nowhere to go. They couldn't go to the dorms. And listen, we know that in Saskatchewan, it's a little different than most other places. There's a lot of Rider fans that drive in a long way to Regina for those games. A whole whackload of them just slept in the car, went out for breakfast, and probably got going at it. So impressive support for the Riders in some pretty trying circumstances. That being said, they didn't get paid back by the home team when this game kicked off on Saturday. Calgary beat the hell out of Winnipeg the week before and made an even bigger statement against the Riders on the road last week. Calgary now right there at the top of the West, going into Winnipeg this weekend. But I guess the question is right now, and this would have been inconceivable to ask a month ago, but are the Calgary Stampeders the number one team in the West in the CFL right now, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you consider Montreal still doesn't have Davis Alexander behind center. That could change this week. But as far as the power rankings goes, absolutely Calgary's the number one team. Would I be picking Calgary to win the Grey Cup this year? I'd kind of pull off on that, futures bet, which I'm sure is at an all-time low, as you mentioned, compared to where Calgary.
They opened at Coolbet at 23-1. They were the longest shot on the board. They're now 6-1 right now.
Yeah,
so yes, everyone's been paying attention to what Calgary's been doing.
Absolutely. And rightfully so. I think early on, Huss, we looked at a couple victories, against the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who have been surging over the last few weeks here, weren't great out of the gate. And then you looked at some losses some wins against the East, and then a loss to Ottawa, right? At home, in what was a game heavily impacted by the very fall-like conditions. So you kind of didn't really know what they were. And then they go out and they beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and then they get everybody's attention. And you start thinking, okay, these Stamps are for real. And then you start, if you're one of those people who don't want to give them credit, and I would put myself maybe in that category. I wasn't against them, but I'm like, okay, still kind of a wait and see approach here. Calgary came into that game playing at home, coming off a bye week. So they had a lot of time to study. And if they have anything on that team, it's a really strong coach in Dave Dickinson and his ability to prepare for opponents. He hasn't had a lot of success the last couple of years, but give him that extra week, and that does make a difference. But we see another situation. In this case, it's almost flipped. It's the Riders coming off the bye week, and it's again, on the road in Saskatchewan, and they go and they beat the bricks off them, right? And it wasn't even so much that it was everything was going their way, right? I'll remind viewers, or even those who didn't see the game, Calgary started with an interception on the first pass of the evening, and then gave up the ball in their next series in a fumble, right? And still led 17-3 at halftime. And then when it looked like the Riders were going to come back and scored a touchdown to make it a 7-point game, well, they answered right back with a touchdown, the second of two touchdowns to Damian Alford, the number one overall pick in the draft, to go up. And then it was kind of sailing from there. So I look at what they've done now against two really good teams. And Huss, this narrative can only grow this week when they visit Winnipeg at home at Princess Auto Stadium, a stadium we know how good the Blue and Gold have performed in recent years, and they can take that narrative even further. But the good news for Winnipeg, and we'll get to that game obviously, is they can snatch it right back. They're also coming off the bye week this week.
I mean, listen, two massive statement games for the Calgary Stampeders, who now go into this weekend tied with the Riders. Well, actually, they're first. I mean, they've got the head-to-head win over Saskatchewan. And the Bombers, of course, were on the bye, having to chew on that ass-kicking from Calgary for an extra week before getting back at it. So it gets to the West, which there's a very shifting landscape of this right now. And it's not good for the Edmonton Elks, which we'll talk about specifically in a minute. Calgary at 4-1. Saskatchewan at 4-1, Winnipeg 3-1. Let's remember they were undefeated going into that game in Calgary, and now all of a sudden the BC Lions have gotten Nathan Rourke back, and they're starting to look good. It's a volatile division right now, Jeff, and I think we have to agree that, with BC's recent play, there's still a clear fourth right now based on what we've seen so far, but this division is as competitive and as tight as we've seen in a long time going into week 7 of a CFL season.
Looking at the standings here, Huss, through the first third of the season, is particular in the West, and you do kind of realize it's a marathon and not a sprint here, right? Lots can change here. Lots can, as hot as we're talking about Calgary right now, it's kind of like the weather in Atlantic Canada. Just wait 15 minutes and we'll be talking about maybe a losing streak here for Calgary over the next few weeks or month. That being said, you've just seen enough from enough teams in that division where maybe some of that doubt still exists, but you have a lot of things in a pros and cons list, if you will, a lot more pros than cons for the first 4 teams there. As you mentioned, we'll get to the Elks here. They are staring up at a very difficult situation if they hope to break their playoff curse. But if you look at those 3 teams, I think we're going to, and maybe even 4 teams, and how important is it now? We knew it was going to be important, but here we are talking about heading into week 7, the tiebreaker that the Winnipeg Blue Bombers already have over the BC Lions. Like, you're already thinking about that playing a role here, and how we've seen the BC Lions perform over the last couple of weeks.
Speaking of BC, let me ask you this, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, we know Calgary's there. We know Saskatchewan is there. Winnipeg is there. Do you see BC in that group of 4 contending teams? Or right now, is there a gap, and is BC more playing potentially for a wild card? Or is this a team that is on the rise, and we're going to be talking about a 4-horse race for the division and playoff spots in the West at this point?
No, I don't at all. I do see them, I see them as a distant 4th. Like if we were to break it up into tiers, Huss, I wouldn't have the BC Lions in that top tier with now I would include all 3 of those teams. I mean, I don't think you can make an argument that Winnipeg should be in a lower tier because they're 3-1, even though they have lost to Calgary. Calgary's beaten, obviously, Saskatchewan. Now, I look at BC and I look at Nathan Rourke's play, and I see a team that's figuring things out. I see a team that still very much is dealing with discipline issues. They're still having, penalties. They're shooting themselves in the foot far too often. They're making games where they've lost significantly worse, and they're making games that they've won incredibly too tight, right? For those games, I'll remind you the last week, right? It took a Sean White kick, a penalty, right, to win that game in the last second. So, which then turned into a melee in Montreal, right? So I don't look at BC as a dominating presence in the West just yet, but just again, as we start to see more glimpses of Nathan Rourke, as we start to see the defense perform the way that they did last week, you're starting to see glimpses, and much like the Hamilton Tiger Cats, the BC Lions are in that stage of, we talked early on in the season, we always do, that it takes some teams 3, 4, as many as 5 games to kind of get to where they want to get to as far as consistency, as far as rhythm, as far as chemistry. And in BC's case, you have a different coach, right? So you have a different offensive game plan. Rourke's familiar there, but again, a lot of moving pieces around the team as they tried to shore up their culture and figure out their leadership group around Nathan Rourke. So I do think that they are improving. I also think because of that progress we've seen in recent weeks, that we could potentially be talking about the BC Lions within the rest of these groups, or a team that's a contender to win the West. But even with these 2 victories back to back, I'm not putting them up there as a team that's necessarily to be taken too seriously. Though I wouldn't be sleeping on them either.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is where I'm at on BC. I think that with Rourke back, we've shown that he makes them, a very dangerous team and a tough out. I'm not sure their defense is there, and I got major questions on their team discipline, and I do think we're going to see some growing pains for Buck Pierce as a first-year head coach right now. So are they better than, certainly they're in a tier way above the Elks. And I do think the way things are shaking out right now, we could be back to a more familiar scenario where there is a crossover, and BC will be very much in the playoff race. I'm just not sure whether that is going to be enough to get ahead of either Saskatchewan, Winnipeg, or the upstart Calgary Stampeders. Well, let's talk about the one team we're not really talking about in the West when it comes to playoff contention, and that is the Edmonton Elks. They drop another one and now sit at 1-4 on the season. Kind of felt like they saved their season with that home win in week 4 that they absolutely had to have. They followed it up by getting absolutely drummed by the BC Lions in probably the most disappointing game of the season. And it was a tough night at the office for Trey Ford, who passed for just over 30 yards with a pick. Cody Fajardo came in garbage time and led the team to a touchdown. So much of this conversation revolves around the quarterback situation, and they put a lot of faith into Trey Ford. This is his team, and this is where they are right now. How dire is the situation in Edmonton right now, and how do you see things going forward with the quarterback situation for a desperate team that needs to get back into it with some wins now?
And that's the problem here, right? Is that they don't have the good feelings that might afford an organization when they need to make decisions, especially important roster decisions like the quarterback, right? I mean, the Elks don't have the benefit of making the playoffs the last few years. They don't have the benefit of being a team that's even in contention or whatever. They're a team that has been reeling, and we've seen it not just on the field. We've seen the consequences move off the field.
They're digging themselves out of the biggest hole in franchise history.
And so, like, a lot of the excitement heading into this year, Huss, was giving Trey Ford that opportunity that he hadn't been afforded in the previous years he's been on the roster. And that's getting a full training camp with the offense, being able to get that shot so that you could look at some of the incredible things he had done in later in seasons with the Elks already out of playoff contention and turn that into some of the early season success. Well, here we are, Huss, and the Elks are 1-4. And while it's not, you can certainly make the argument, and those who will want Trey Ford to stay behind center will lead with this, I imagine, is it's a long season, right? They still have 13 more games to play this year, and a lot can happen in that time. That being said, I don't know how you look at Trey Ford, who, again, a lot of excitement heading into the season, but with a massive question mark around whether he would be able to succeed there. And I had made some comments in previous shows about, yes, he's got confidence in his abilities. I just don't think he's a confident Canadian Football League quarterback. And I've mentioned his activity or lack thereof when it comes to controlling and demanding, that leadership in the huddles. And it's just, again, I'm not equating that, and I'm not pretending to be some CFL football quarterback guru where I'm looking at his feet, footwork, or saying this and that. I'm looking at a 1-4 record and a team that desperately needs to break the narrative, but has a quarterback that is just going up and down. And I want to ask you this one, Huss. The question might be whether or not it's time for Cody Fajardo to come in. But the question I want to ask you is, and I think it's fair to ask this question, would Trey Ford still be the quarterback of this team if he was American? Like, if an American came off a 43-yard passing performance for his team to fall to 1-4, you don't think that they would go to Cody Fajardo?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't necessarily think it's the passport in this, more that, and listen, being a Canadian doesn't hurt him, but it is the fact that they have set him up. They've said, this is his team. This is their starting quarterback. And when you go, at a certain point, when you pull the plug on that, it is a huge, significant organizational decision. And that had happened earlier on in the previous seasons that Ford was there. And this is the thing about Trey Ford. Incredible, dynamic athlete. He's pretty much guaranteed to end up on the highlight reel on a couple times each and every game. But to me, there's a question mark with his preparation, his decision-making, his execution. And, you had brought this up before. I mean, there is an element of being kind of the CEO of the team, of the offense. And I'm not sure that he's ever been at that point or is close to being at the point of truly commanding that team, that huddle, as the top quarterbacks in the league do. Now, listen, I think this guy's got a bright future ahead of him. I think he can play. I think he belongs on a CFL roster and on a depth chart. But I'm out on Trey Ford being right now in 2025, being a starting quarterback that can take the Edmonton Elks and challenge on a weekly basis the Stampeders, the Lions, the Bombers, and of course the Roughriders in the West. And that puts Edmonton in a very, very difficult situation, which, as we mentioned, is completely compounded by the stench of the Chris Jones era in Edmonton that just about took down the franchise. So if I'm Edmonton right now, it's a tough decision to make, but they need to win some football games. I would start Cody Fajardo. I would get him in there. I would give him the full week of practice to give him the best chance to the next time they get out onto the field to try and win a football game. And hopefully Trey Ford's a professional about it. This is not the first time he wouldn't have been a starter. I think he needs to learn from some of these lessons, and maybe in a year or two, Trey Ford learns kind of the hard way from some of the downs of the early part of his career, and it makes him even better moving forward. But the bottom line is right now, that team, that product is not competitive enough. He's not getting the job done, and they don't have another season just to burn finding out what they have in a guy. It's time to win some games and be competitive again. And I know Mark Killam doesn't want to just sink his entire first season as head coach into once and for all finding out if Trey Ford can take you to the playoffs and make you a competitive football team.
I'm glad you brought up Mark Killam, because that's the guy I was thinking about as you were talking, thinking, is it his decision? Right? Is it his decision? Is it Ed Hervey's decision? Whose decision is it to stick with him or to move on from him? Because those
discussions of all of those people involved. I mean, it is the biggest decision you make as a football team.
And to your point, what makes Trey Ford more special than any other quarterback that's been pulled in the past? Like you make this mention, like, you hope he handles it correctly. Like, you damn well better handle it correctly. I mean, this is pro sports, and your team is staring at a West Division that doesn't have a lot of wiggle room in it, right? We're talking about the BC Lions, who are at 3-3, maybe squeezing into a crossover spot. Like, I mean, if Edmonton is going to turn things around, they can't go to 1-5, 1-6, 1-7. They'll be done. They'll be talking about next year already, and they won't be getting the fans. They're not already getting the fans. So something has to give. I mean, this has to go down to, and I'm not suggesting by this comment that any moves were made otherwise, but you need to look really hard at this position and wonder if Trey Ford gives you not just enough to win this week coming up, but down the road and into the Grey Cup. And we just haven't seen that. And I also think that Cody Fajardo was brought in for this exact reason, to be able to weather the inevitable storms that would come with Trey Ford getting his first start as the number one pivot. I mean, I think he should be allowed to have missteps here. I think he should be allowed to fail, and he has been allowed to fail and gotten back up and and received opportunities through these games here. But I also think Cody Fajardo can come in, and Trey Ford, it's not like forget about him, run him out of town, rule him out of the equation. It's letting him see, breathe, take a moment and come back in. And when he's ready, maybe it is the best thing that's happened for him. But if it isn't, maybe you have your answer already. Because at the end of the day, Trey Ford's not old. However, he's been in the league now for 4 or 5 years, and needs, you can make the statement that he should be better now. He should be given his opportunities. He should be a bit more consistent. And unfortunately, whether it's Mark Killam, whether it's Ed Hervey, or anybody in that front office, you don't have the luxury of developing a quarterback for years with the hopes of turning around your organization. This is the CFL where we've seen teams in the past actually win free agency, buy a bunch of players, and win the Grey Cup that year. I think of, Toronto in 2017 that did exactly that. So there isn't these multi-year rebuilds, and it certainly does not exist or can't happen in Edmonton. So I'm with you. I think at this point, you got to go with Cody Fajardo. He gives you the best chance to win at this point. And again, not ignoring Trey Ford, but just giving a different flavor to the offense and what's been pretty vanilla so far.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we knew that this team was going to be, they said it all off season, and it was a popular decision, I think, in Edmonton. And again, because people have been tantalized by the incredible plays that he has made at times. It just hasn't been consistent enough, and it hasn't turned into enough wins. And you do wonder what an alternate reality looks like, where Vernon Adams ended up in Edmonton as opposed to Calgary, and how different that would make the early start of this CFL season look. But I'll tell you what, people in Cowtown certainly happy that the Stamps were able to get VA, and their record speaks for itself after a big game last week. One more before we get to the games. It was a weird week last week in that 3 teams were on the bye. Winnipeg had its second bye of the year. I still don't... This schedule this year is the weirdest I think I've ever seen. Anyways, Winnipeg started off on a bye. They've had another one. They've only played 4 games heading into this week, but it's the Argos and the Alouettes that'll meet this week, both coming off the bye. Now, some big injury news with all of those teams. Chad Kelly's not even with the team right now. He's rehabbing in Buffalo. We got news yesterday that Davis Alexander is expected to return for the Alouettes. A big bonus for them after playing with MBT the last couple games. And in Winnipeg, it was insult to injury in the Calgary game in the fourth quarter when the starters were still out there and Dalton Schoen went out, and Schoen has not been a participant in practice and is not, at least at this point in the week, expected to play. Bouncing back after a bye. The Bombers have been the best in the game in doing it. They've got their challenges and have one hell of a tough out with the Stamps coming back in fresh off that win in Saskatchewan. And then a head-to-head matchup between an Argos team that is seeing time sort of run out on them to get into this season. And meanwhile, Montreal's still the class of the league, getting Davis Alexander back. How do you see, and again, we'll get into the game picks in just a minute. We'll start off with Toronto-Montreal. But the effect of the bye week on these 3 teams, who's the big winner?
Yeah, I think, the big winner is going to be decided at the end of this weekend, right? And when the results come in.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at Winnipeg as obviously with Toronto and Montreal, the other 2 teams, and the fact that they're playing each other, and we'll get into that matchup a little bit more. Someone's going to win, barring there isn't an odd tie. However, I look at Winnipeg as the team who's going to win the most off the bye. I think they look at the opponent that they got there, as you mentioned, and as Mike O'Shea certainly agreed with you, has got their asses kicked by the Stampeders. This Bombers team will have a bitter taste in their mouth. They'll be playing at home. We know how good Winnipeg is, at Princess Auto Stadium. So I just see with that added bye week, and then adding insult to injury, the opportunity to play that exact team again, a team in the Calgary Stampeders who, are playing hot, but are coming, have played this past weekend in Saskatchewan, so they don't get the luxury of that added rest. I think this is Winnipeg's opportunity to lay the boom, just given the success they've had coming off bye weeks, the fact that they're playing at home, a place where, again, they don't lose very often, and up against a team that they obviously still have that bad taste in their mouths watching that tape all the way leading up into kickoff.
All right, well, let's get to the Week 7 slate. And good news for CFL fans, 4 games, 4 nights, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We started off with those 2 teams coming off the bye, the Toronto Argonauts in Montreal to take on the Alouettes. Of course, the Alouettes pumped the Argos 28-10 in a Week 1 matchup between these 2 clubs. Chad Kelly not expected to play. Davis Alexander expected to play. And looking at Coolbet, it certainly shows that in the number. Point spread for this game right now, Jeff, is the Alouettes minus 8.5 against the 1-win Toronto Argonauts. I'll be honest, I've been expecting more from Toronto, but all year long we've thought that Montreal is the class of the East. I mean, do you see the Argos being in this game? Can they make it close, or is this a double-digit win for the Alouettes and an easy cover without the Argos having their starting QB?
Well, I look at 8.5 points, and I never see that as necessarily an easy cover, right? I mean, but I think there's some clear factors that we should be focusing on. You already started off the top. Chad Kelly has not been participating this week, so I don't see that, him playing in 2 days' time here, having the fact that he hasn't played all season. So we already know how the Argos have performed, right? They don't have the benefit of the extra week of preparation because Montreal also has that advantage, also coming off the bye week. So I just look at the dominance, and that game's in Montreal.
Yeah,
correct?
it is in Montreal.
Yeah, it's in Montreal. So that to me kind of feels like the added piece to this. Obviously, getting Davis Alexander back is absolutely massive. He's been chomping at the bit. You can see him on the sidelines in these games. They want to get back to winning ways in Montreal. Jason Moss is probably not a fun guy to be around the stadium over the last couple of weeks as Montreal tries to figure their life out without Alexander. So I do see this as a massive piece of this. I see this as not that Jason Moss isn't one of those coaches that would be likely to run up the score in games, which I think you need to consider when you look at a point spread that's at 8.5. That being said, I do think because the need for Montreal to get those good feelings back into the fold, to the fact again that they're playing at home and they're playing against a Toronto team that isn't going to have their starting quarterback, and I don't think they're going to have Wynton McManus back either, their leader on defense. That's just a bad situation and a perfect storm for my money, if you will, Haas. I am going to take Montreal. I see this as a 10-point plus victory.
Yeah, listen, I'm a guy that usually likes to take points, especially with teams that I do think highly of, and that is the Toronto Argonauts. I mean, the record over the last number of years speaks for itself. A lot of respect for Ryan Dinwiddie. But I also have a very high opinion of the Montreal Alouettes. And you mentioned that bye week. I mean, it was here in Winnipeg. I mean, the Bombers having to chew on getting worked by the Calgary Stampeders. What must that bye week have been like for the Montreal Alouettes after somehow finding a way to lose that game against the BC Lions 2 weeks ago? And I know you and Reem last week when I was away broke it down and the fight afterwards and all of that. I think we're going to see a Montreal team that comes out all business, especially with Davis Alexander back. And, this is a team, I think they've got the offense that can get it done. They weren't up to their standard even close in that BC game, and that's part of the reason why BC even had the opportunity to be in that game when they frankly didn't deserve to late in the fourth quarter 2 weeks ago. And then I just think that Toronto right now, without Chad Kelly, does not have the horses, particularly at the QB position, despite Nick Arbuckle's Grey Cup heroics, going into a tough place to play. So I think I'm gonna hold my nose and lay the 8.5 with the Montreal Alouettes in the Thursday nighter.
Haas, before we move on, though, I want to say one thing. I think you said something that was really important. And that is, I think, especially with Alexander behind center, that the Alouettes, because I think that even the defense, right? This is a very proud and talented defense. I don't think they like, especially the way that game against BC ended, but just their play in general. So I think you're going to see a 3-phase effort, and I think they're going to come out of the gate incredibly hot. So I look at, not that we often do this, in fact, I don't think we have, but I would look at, first quarter plays. I would look at first half plays, because when you're looking at an 8.5 point, that can look pretty good when a team is up, 14 points or whatever. But it's usually when they go up 21 points by halftime, it's always like, not that you just inevitably take your foot off the gas. You're more of clock control. You're adding threes rather than trying to go for sevens. And so a lot of the times when you're trading touchdowns for field goals as a desperate team tries to come, that's when you see what you call a backdoor cover. So I would focus on some of the early. I do see the Alouettes coming out of the gate fast, so I look at the first quarter and halftime spreads.
Yeah, total on that one, 51. And in case you're wondering, the money line right now, Argos plus 316 for the upset, and the Alouettes minus 417. Tell you what, the folks at Friday Night Football at TSN sure got a beauty for Friday night. The red-hot Calgary Stampeders coming off those 2 huge wins at home against the Bombers, on the road last week against the Riders, back-to-back wins against previously undefeated teams, now come into Winnipeg against a Bomber team that I believe has won 14 straight coming out of the bye and have barely lost at Princess Auto Stadium over the course of the last 5 years. But this is not the Calgary Stampeders of previous seasons. Vernon Adams is cooking now. 424 through the air last week. And again, a game that probably a final score that flattered the Saskatchewan Roughriders. That is how good Calgary's been. And listen, while we'll focus in on the offensive players and VA and what he's done, to me, the story for the Calgary Stampeders is this defense, which is completely turned over from last year. And that has been the unit that has really, set the tone for Calgary throughout. This is a very difficult game, despite all the history of Winnipeg at home, Winnipeg off the bye. No Dalton Schoen, I think, is a real significant injury for Winnipeg. And of course, Zach Collaros coming off a game where he had 2 pick sixes against this same team. I think is going to need to bounce back in a big way as well if they're going to win this football game. Now, the spread is 3.5, which I think is fair. I mean, we're talking about 3 points for home field. Essentially a pick 'em on a neutral field, and I think that would be pretty fair. Where are you at on this one? Calgary getting 3.5 coming into Winnipeg to take on the Bombers.
So this is where I come from on this pick, Huss. I've seen this movie before. I've seen this movie over and over and over and over again. The movie of the Bombers coming off a tough loss, always rebounding from a tough loss, especially on home turf. The Bombers' success coming off a bye week has been insane. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's bananas. Like it's a lot of wins and very, very, very few losses. And so that's the perfect storm combining here at Princess Auto Stadium on Friday. So I look at the 3.5 point spread here in favor of Winnipeg, and I look at a team that is I look at an algorithm, if you will, or an equation that's putting a lot of stock into Calgary. And I do think that Calgary is a solid team. I do think they're a much better team than we've seen in the past. But I also think, like every other team in this league, they are human and will be susceptible to bad situations. And this one is it for me. I do agree with you. I think that the loss of Dalton Schoen is a tough one. I think that's reflective in the spread. I do think the Stampeders defense have been lights out. I'm going with a pissed off Zach Collaros, because as you mentioned, coming off a game that he had to chew on where he got picked off not just once, but twice, both of which were returned for touchdowns. I think it's an offense that is proud, is going to want to rebound against this defense. I think this defense is not going to like Vernon Adams didn't throw the lights out in that game, but they had a very complimentary, run attack and air attack. And so this defense is going to be really proud as well. And I do think, on special teams, I'm not going to say that Winnipeg's going to rally on special teams per se, but I do think that this is one of those games where we just see Winnipeg answer back in a way that will cover the 3.5 point spread. And the last comment, just as the justification in this, Haas, is that if Calgary does come into Winnipeg and beat the Bombers and put together that 3-game stretch that they would have put together with a victory of Winnipeg twice and Saskatchewan once, we are talking about the Calgary Stampeders being not just real, but incredibly legit Grey Cup contenders this year. And I'm just not ready to buy into that right now.
Yeah, listen, if Calgary wins this game, they're undoubtedly the team to beat in the West right now. I mean, you can argue about Montreal in the East right now, but I mean, listen, if you go in, you beat an undefeated Bomber team, go to Saskatchewan, beat an undefeated Rider team, and then follow it up with another win in Winnipeg, where the Bombers always win and always win coming off the bye, you're going to be that number 1 team in the West on the power poll and be right there as a Grey Cup favorite with the Montreal Alouettes. Listen, I think this is going to be a really close game. I am going to kind of ride with you based on history and giving the Bombers the benefit of the doubt that they will come back being a much better, much more prepared team, ready to look more like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers than they did when it seemed like they had checked out for the bye week before that game even started. But again, this was not just a matter of the Bombers not playing up to their standard. This was a Calgary team that worked them in every single aspect of the football game and then did it again the following week against a very good Rider team that at that point was 4-0. I think the Bombers can win this game. 3.5 makes me really nervous. I think it's a very fair line. I think this is going to be a close game. To be honest, I think that if you are thinking the Bombers win, to me, the path to victory for the Bombers is not going to be laying it all on the arm of Zach Collaros. It's going to be a much better defensive performance by the Bombers against VA and that Calgary offense. and it's going to be a ton of running the football. Brady Oliveira, ball control, moving the chains, winning time of possession. And to be honest, that leans me to the under in this game, the under 50. As far as the spread, though, until otherwise noted, Bombers coming off a loss, Bombers coming off a bye, playing at sold-out Princess Auto Stadium. I will ride with them at -3.5. But as I said, a Calgary win would not shock me like most situations like this with the Bombers being in would be. And I do think that if the Bombers are going to win, I think we're going to see a game that could be significantly under the total as opposed to, a high-flying game. They're going to have to get
What's
to Vernon
the total
Adams.
right now? What
It's
is
50.
It's I hate the over-under. Like, I hate picking under. Like, I'm an NFL under guy. I try to identify those games that are going to be as boring as possible, and then I watch every second of them hoping for no offense. So, like, I understand the idea of taking an under, but there's something about 50 points in the CFL, particularly this year, particularly as rules favor the offenses, continue to favor the offense. I look at, this is a fairly disciplined two teams, for sure. So, but there's just something about, like, even games that end like 7-3 after the first half just end up with like 54, 55. It's just like, I don't know, but I like what you're thinking. I do think this is two very good defenses and two defenses that are going to want to make their impact and want to be the reason why their respective team wins. And when you combine those two things, you're absolutely looking at a low scoring affair. But there's something about Zach Collaros. Here's why I would caution against it, Hassan. I hate that I'm stomping on your bet here, but I caution it because I see Zach Collaros gunslinging it this week. Like, I feel like him putting up.
He was trying to gunsling it 2 weeks ago, and he threw
I know,
two
but
pick
this
sixes.
is the benefit of the bye week, right? You saw the team you played, right? A lot of teams didn't think that the Calgary Stampeders were going to beat the Bombers, but that bye week matters. And like I said, that I'm saying I think that the offense puts up points. Am I saying they're going to put a 30 burger up? No, not necessarily, but I do think whether it plays out that way, you're going to have a Zach Collaros who is extra motivated to make an impact in this game after a tough one. And just when you play VA, man, like, I just feel like when you look at the connection he just had with Damian Alford, that number one pick, the 2 touchdowns, you see Philpott coming into it, finally kind of matching his brother Jalen Philpott in Calgary, kind of catching up to his brother Jalen in Montreal. I think or Tyson in Montreal. Sorry, I think he's gonna be able to put that in. Like, they've just had chemistry, and VA loves throwing the ball. And I know Dedrick Mills has been running the rock really well. I just see two quarterbacks trying to pitch it. That's all.
Yeah, I'm going to lean on some Brady Oliveira props as we get closer to the game. And I do think in this matchup, I think it's going to be first team to get to 25. I think probably wins this football game. Saturday, another awesome West matchup in BC at the Dome. The Riders coming off their first loss of the season at 4-1, going into BC to take on the Lions, who've won 2 in a row, have gotten back to 500. The Lions are a slight 1.5 point home dog. This game on the money line is Riders -118, BC -103. I mean, we'll make our picks based on the 1.5 point line for the Riders, but to me, Jeff, this really feels basically like a pick 'em. Are you buying into the momentum BC has coming out of these last couple of wins, or will this be an ornery Rider team looking to remind everyone that they aren't going anywhere at the top of the West?
Well, Haas, is this the start of the 7-game losing streak for the Riders? Is this where it starts?
I don't know if they have that one in their bag.
Does it take us to Labor Day? Does it take us to Labor Day or what? No, I mean, I don't, I'm a little bit nervous about this line, to be honest with you. I think it's fairly disrespectful to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. I mean, they're 1.5 point favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess they're getting some respect here as their road favorites, but I don't know. I don't know about BC, and I'll mention my point about them earlier. There's some disciplinary issues with BC, and the best, and we also have to say that BC's beaten Edmonton twice. Right, like in their victories, including. And
I still don't know how they beat Montreal 2 weeks ago as well.
And the thing is that they shouldn't have beat Montreal 2 weeks ago, right? I mean, they were down and out. I mean, good for them for getting it done, but no, and that was against a Davis Alexander list team. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like they were up against a formidable foe. They got that victory. So it's not been convincing wins to me. I actually think that, I'd love to see Saskatchewan get a little bit healthier here, though, man. I mean, not having Keon Schaefer-Baker, I don't think we should have mentioned it up top when we talked about this loss. Like, this was an offense that was heading into the game scoring the most offensive points against a defense that was allowing the most. Something had to give in that game. And while Calgary did a great job of limiting the offense on there, as you mentioned, you could probably make the argument that the score flattered the Riders in that first game. But here's the thing: the Riders got into the red zone twice. Right? They got into the red zone twice down the stretch and gambled twice and had turnovers on downs on both of those tries. So they were in striking distance twice in those fights. And that's where the difference is for me. You take that bad taste into BC, and in this case, I think that you score those opportunities against the BC Lions. I'm not buying the progress in BC just yet, given who they've beaten. So I'm all over the Riders to bounce back in this game and to cover what you said is ultimately a pick 'em. I like what Nathan Rourke and what they've been doing there. I still don't see enough for them to lay the boots, and I guess they wouldn't have to given the spread, but even to edge the Saskatchewan Roughriders on home field.
This is such a tough pick, and you make a compelling argument for Saskatchewan, and I don't think, Rider fans or anyone that follows this league, I think, is writing them off because of one tough Saturday afternoon that was supposed to be a Friday night against the Calgary Stampeders. But at the same time, when I think about this game, and I think that it should be somewhat close, I think I'm going to ride with Nathan Rourke in this one. I mean, they're in a situation with the start that they had that they have to win a few of these games against some of these other top teams in the West, and no better chance to do that at home. They're already 0-2 against the Bombers. They're not getting that crack again at it. And this is a massive, massive game for BC when it comes to trying to get back. If they win, they're 4-3. Saskatchewan's 4-2. We'll see what happens in the Bomber game, but they'll be right in it. They lose, and then we're talking about that gap between 3 and 4.
Now do the Riders. Now do the Riders.
Yeah, well, listen.
Now do the Riders. If they lose, they go down to 4-2, and all of a sudden BC's nipping at their heels. They go up and go 5-1, and they're staring down at a team that, I'm not saying is too much of a window, but I think there's just as much motivation on both sides.
Listen, I just think BC is probably maybe a little bit more of a desperate team, although Saskatchewan is going to be in an ornery mood after what happened in Calgary.
Especially with that lack of run game, man. That's the thing. Calgary is a great defense. They absolutely shut, AJ Ouellette, at one certain points of the game, I was wondering if he was even in the lineup still. There was just no success. And the pressure on Trevor Harris was insane. We all know the reputation of Trevor Harris, right? He's the guy who can get the ball out of his hands faster than anybody else. And he was struggling mightily. I don't see the BC Lions getting that similar pressure. And I see this being and to your point, I do see this being a very close game. I do think there's a lot at stake here, and I'll go back to my comments in the past about personality of games. If you can get live betting on these teams within +3.5 for either club, even more so better, I can see this one going down to the wire, both fighting it, gutting it out in the fourth quarter in a one-score game. And that's where I see this one.
Listen, I'm going to roll with BC. I'll take them as the 1.5 point home
Good
underdog.
for you. I was giving it to you and trying to convince you otherwise. I like it.
I mean, the one thing, and again, it's difficult. How much do we take away of their performance last week because it was against an Edmonton Elks team that barely showed up? But man, did they look good. Their offense was balanced. Rourke looked amazing. And I'm sitting here talking about
James
Rourke.
Butler.
I should mention James Butler, 30 carries, 174 yards. Now, I don't think we're going to see numbers anywhere like that against the Saskatchewan Roughriders.
Buck Pierce wants to establish that run game.
Well, and if they can do that, how much does that help a guy like Nathan Rourke? So another great matchup. I mean, really, it's too bad Chad Kelly isn't playing this week, because I think you could have one of the most intriguing weeks of the entire league in the Canadian Football League with the two perceived top two teams in the East, although Hamilton's making a move on that right now, going at it. And then, of course, the Calgary, Winnipeg, and Saskatchewan, BC games. Final matchup of the week is the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who have woke up much earlier than they did from an 0 start this season as they did last year. Kenny Lawler has arguably been the best player in the league so far this year. Yeah. Bo Levi's feeling it. And the Ottawa Redblacks are in a familiar situation, having only one win and feeling like they're in a desperate time before we even get to the month of August. Hamilton is a 1.5-point road favorite in this, very similar to Saskatchewan at BC. Do we see Drew Brown and the Redblacks rise up at home and get the win, or does Hamilton maintain their momentum and get their 4th win of the season?
Well, Huss, we kind of got a preview of that last week, right? So like we saw Hamilton edge out a win against Ottawa in a game that they hadn't led all game until the final 2 minutes. And I guess it showed resiliency for Hamilton in that they were able to stick to their game plan, were able to believe in their approach and ultimately pounced at the end of the game to edge that win, to take that win. I don't know what's going on with the Redblacks, man. I really don't. I'm concerned about them. I mean, you look, we kind of, I'm glad we saved it for this section because we were kind of talking about it earlier. But when you look at the Ottawa Redblacks last 3 games, right? They lost. They obviously lost a tight one to Hamilton, as I just mentioned. Then they lost to Toronto in what was a pretty convincing game for Toronto. They lost to Edmonton. Let's not get to Toronto yet. They lost to Edmonton. So the team that we've been giving gears to every week and finally took a break on last week, Huss, when you were away with Muriel, we finally got to talk about an Elks victory. Well, that was very short-lived. But that was the victory. They lose to Edmonton. And then you look at the Toronto game, right? 29-16. We've been talking about Toronto without Chad Kelly and the issues they've had, the injuries on defense as well. So this is a team that's not just losing. They're losing to not so great teams, but again, noting that they were still within 3 points of the last game against the very team they're playing this week, and they were on the road for it. So here they are coming back home, and this is the part where you look at a team like Ottawa and you wonder, when are things going to turn? Because eventually they're going to turn, right? Eventually things are going to get desperate. Players are going to get so pissed off. Things are going to be so ornery around the stadium that you just will yourself to a victory. Is that this week? I think it is. I think that Ottawa has to get it done. I look at Hamilton. Yep, they squeeze out that win against Ottawa, and again, credit to them. But they beat a Toronto team. They just absolutely beat the crap out of a Toronto team the week before that. But in that game, they still allowed 38 points against Toronto. And then the week before that, they went at home to the Montreal Alouettes, who doesn't have Davis Alexander. So while Hamilton has made advances here and has played well, I see this as a revenge game for Ottawa. I see as Ottawa trying to figure things out. You mentioned about, what a BC win might mean against Saskatchewan. I mean, Hamilton's got to think, or Ottawa's got to think what a win over Hamilton will mean for their East standings, right? Especially after losing last week. So in this case, I think Drew Brown, he's back. He's getting healthier. I see him having a big game, getting back on the page with his offense, but I don't see it as a convincing win. I just don't have that confidence and trust in a team that keeps shooting themselves. Again, they're another team that has a lack of discipline, has things happen in games that are just kind of unexplainable and struggle in some cases. So I do think Ottawa wakes up in this game. I think this is a massive Drew Brown game at home. I just, as much as I don't have confidence in the Redblacks and certainly shouldn't given their last 3 games, I do see them being one of those games where they upset the Hamilton Tiger Cats, are seen as a dog, but really it's just two kind of teams that haven't been getting, or one team's been getting the bounces, one hasn't, and I see the bounces bouncing in Ottawa's favor this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to be too prone to hyperbole in the middle of July for the Canadian Football League season, but much like 2 weeks ago in Edmonton for the Elks when the Redblacks were in Edmonton. To me, this is Ottawa's season, this game here. They lose this game, and they fall to what would have been, they've got one, and they've already lost 5 games. They haven't had a bye week yet. They fall to 1-6. We expect Toronto to be better at some point when they get Chad Kelly back. Now, where that puts them, we'll see. But you would have a huge gap between Hamilton and Montreal and Ottawa. And never mind the East. I mean, we'll be talking about that third-place team in the East is can they make the playoffs in the East, or will there be a team from the West crossing over? Ottawa has to win this football game. Listen, I thought they played quite well against Hamilton last week. I mean, that was a team that was coming off laying up a 50-burger on an Argos team, and it certainly was tight. Now, listen, Kenny Lawler is a problem for everybody in the league right now. Bo Levi's feeling it, but I am with you. Let's not forget that a bunch of these losses for the Redblacks were when Drew Brown was out. Drew Brown has to lead them to a victory. I think that their preparation this week will be all about doing everything they can to be a little bit better, because if they were a little bit better in a few cases last week, they might get a big road win. It's tough to beat a team 2 weeks in a row. The home fans will be there behind Ottawa. This is their season. I'll ride with you and take Ottawa plus 1.5 over at Coolbet for the Sunday finale. Hammer, well, listen, I'll talk to Patty and Jake over at Coolbet and get something. I mean, we're both on the Alouettes. We're both on the Bombers. We're split on the Rider BC game. And we both like Ottawa. So what do you think about Montreal minus 8.5, Bombers minus 3.5, Ottawa plus 1.5 for a CFL 110 boosted parlay over at Coolbet?
Sounds like free money to me.
Free money, I'm not sure. To me, this is a really tough week.
It is a tough week, and they're always tough weeks. But
I mean, an awesome slate of games, and bringing it back here closer to home here in Winnipeg. What a scene that's going to be! An 8 straight sellout for the Bombers. The Stamps coming in. And listen, this game was pretty much already sold out before that game even happened, which is credit to everything that's happening here in Winnipeg. They're getting closer to filling that game, I believe, against the Argos on the August 1st. But with everything that goes into this, the Bombers coming off the bye, the Bombers having to chew on that ass kicking from Calgary, and Calgary looking to cement their status as a true Grey Cup contender. Couldn't have a much better one for national TV with the full panel here. And I will mention one thing just before we go. It will be, I think, a very emotional night at Princess Auto Stadium, in that it's the return of Milt Stegall, who considers Winnipeg his second home, returning to the panel this week here in Winnipeg after the tragic sudden passing of his son Chase. And I think that we're going to see something as close to a 32,000 person group hug as we've ever seen, as Winnipeg, TSN, and the Canadian Football League welcomes Milt back after such a horrible family tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Milt's such a special human being. He's touched the hearts of so many fans, not just in Winnipeg, but across the league. He is, to me, being a guy from Winnipeg, born and raised, is a superstar in the CFL, right? He's the reason why I think there's an argument to be made that the CFL has stars, right? Whatever that debate was earlier in the year in the offseason. So yeah, definitely looking forward to him being back, smiling, happy. His perspective has been nothing short of incredible. And, we all hurt for him, but we all, like he says, we all smile for him too, right? We all are enjoying life for him too, as he's so, eloquently stated in these past whatever weeks here, but certainly looking forward to this slate of games, and for him to come back to his, as he calls it, his second home. It's a really special moment, and again, I think everyone's just jacked to have him back.
Yeah, I tell you what, I know there's a lot of Bomber fans that'll be checking this show out, that'll be going to the game on Friday night, that have Milt Stegall jerseys in the closet. I think it would be a great day to pull out those 85s and welcome Milt back to the Canadian Football League. The broadcast for TSN, and of course back to Winnipeg, where he starred for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers for so many years. Folks, check Coolbet. We'll have all the lines up right now. And at the top in the combo cards, we'll have our CFL 110 boosted parlay. If you want to ride with us Alouettes -8, Bombers -3.5, Ottawa +1.5. We'll have that up for you a little later on today. Hammer, should be a great one this week. I'm already looking forward to doing this next week to talk about these games in Week 7 of the Canadian Football League. Thanks again for doing this as always. Thanks to everyone for checking it out. Tell a friend about Winnipeg Sports Talk and CFL 110, where you can grab it. And make sure to head over to CoolBet if you're looking to bet on the games and ride with us on the CFL 110 Boosted Parlay. Enjoy Week 7 of the Canadian Football League, everybody. We'll see you next Tuesday right here on WST for another edition of CFL 110.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.